Hello everybody, I'm David Temple, conductor of Hertfordshire Chorus, and I'm delighted to be interviewing Shruthi Rajasekar today. I met Shruthi back in January 2020 at the Royal Albert Hall when she was part of an event to launch a CD for the National Youth Choir of Great Britain. And we got chatting and found we had lots of musical interests in common, and since then we've commissioned Shruthi at Hertfordshire Chorus to write a piece for us. So a very warm welcome to you, Shruthi.
Thank you so much, and I'm so excited that we're collaborating together.
My first question is, what is your earliest musical memory?
My mother is a professional musician, so I grew up around it, and I can remember going to concerts around the age of 3 and 4 alongside her. And every time I would bring coloring books with me, but then I would always forget them because I was just in awe of the music that I was hearing. So those are the first memories I have.
So your mum's quite famous, isn't she?
Yes, certainly. So she is a South Indian classical musician known as a Carnatic musician. So Carnatic music is the classical music of South India. And she is probably most known for playing the veena, the Saraswati veena, which is a 7-stringed, 5-foot instrument that is estimated to be at least 2,000 years old. She plays this instrument, but she's also a vocalist, and I studied Indian classical vocal music with her growing up.
So you must have grown up with a mixture of Indian and Western classical music.
Certainly growing up here in the US, I was exposed to all kinds of Western idioms, be it classical or otherwise. And I studied piano and as a kid and had a lot of interest in that. But I really didn't have much, perhaps, theoretical grounding in Western classical music for a very long time. I actually sort of made it through my early piano lessons by kind of, using oral skills. I really couldn't sight read actually for a very long time. And that's because the Indian classical tradition is an oral tradition. So we develop very, very strong oral skills, but the music is indeed passed down. And we have a script system, but it's not a notation system that's intended to be comprehensive in the way that Western scores are. So yes, I kind of, fooled my way through lessons. And then I joined the school choir. I loved the experience of making music with the group and potentially, sacrificing some of my individual desire to stand out in order to contribute to something larger than myself. Choir became the pathway for me to learn my theory and then eventually to compose.
What was it that inspired you to become a composer?
I think I was always creating pieces and songs. And one of the reasons that I wasn't always the best piano student was because I was often playing my own little ditties and not necessarily practicing the repertoire in front of me. I'm grateful for that in some ways because I think I had, teachers and mentors who encouraged me to be creating. So even though I didn't use the word composing at this point, ages 8, 9, I was constantly writing songs and I never doubted my ability to do that. In terms of the Indian classical tradition, every performer is in many ways a composer because the improv element of that tradition is very, very strong and is built into the way that we learn music. So there's this habit of creating. What is different is we don't necessarily use the term composition to describe that process. So it wasn't until I won a song contest for amateur writers when I was 12. And that was a hugely powerful moment for me, for someone to look at me and say, oh, you are a composer, what you're doing matters and we want to hear it. And I think that's a very, very critical part of the compositional process is having the feedback from performers and creating the work with the performers, treating them as co-creators, and then having the audience be an integral part of what we create and what we communicate. So that is sort of how the process of composition happened for me.
That's lovely. Which composers do you revere? Who do you look up to? And who do you listen to in your spare time?
I would say that I take inspiration from a lot of different sources. There are Indian classical musicians whom I consider to be amazing, brilliant composers, including ones from the 20th century. So I have a great respect, for example, for my guru's guru, Professor T.R. Subramaniam. He is no longer with us on this mortal world, but he was a brilliant musician who was both very respectful of tradition, but also not afraid to ask questions of the tradition and to innovate. And so I take so much inspiration from that. Since living in the UK, I have just been in awe of the musical scene there. And in terms of UK composers, I would say people like Erlen Wallen Eleanor Alberga, Anna Meredith, so many composers who I think are both thinking of tradition, but also innovating with it. And I'm particularly in awe of, women of color working in the UK scene. I think they've long been doing very, very important work. Now we're talking about these things more, but many of people are, they've been doing this for a while. So I think they carry themselves also with a quiet dignity that I hope to someday approach.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Now, what brought you to the UK? I don't mean aeroplane, of course. I mean, what musical opportunity brought you to the UK?
Yes, so I actually ended up in the UK as a recipient of the Marshall Scholarship from the UK government, which is given to about between 40 and 50 Americans each year for postgraduate work and for the experience of having some kind of civilian-esque ambassadorial exchange between our two countries. What I didn't realize was how much of myself I would start to piece together while I was in the UK, because this was the third element of myself that had been missing. So I'm of Indian heritage and my full family is Indian. I was born and raised in the US, and those two identities are very important to me. But somewhere in the UK is where I understood how that nexus really operates. So I felt that I had to come back and, certainly work with the musical organizations there. And as part of that process, piece together these disparate elements of how we reconcile the post-colonial legacy. So making music with British musicians has been, for me, a path to that understanding and healing. And I'm just so excited to have the opportunity to continue that.
Is that your composing room you're in now?
It is the primary place where I'm composing.
So tell us how your day develops. If you're meant to be writing a piece that day, what actually happens in your room?
In terms of the creative work for me, there are kind of a few different phases I might be in and I might be going back and forth between. So there's this phase at the piano, which is typically where I might be creating work and sort of improvising the most perhaps, and having those moments of discovery, those exciting moments where, for me, how it usually happens is I'll land somewhere unexpected, or maybe perhaps make a quote unquote mistake in what I was intending, and then find something I hadn't anticipated. So that is the very exciting sort of mad scientist part of the phase, which happens here. Sort of equally important in that, of course, is the structure and the planning, especially with the project that we are embarking upon. Very, very important to keep that in the background. So to let my imagination go here, but then also, not exactly rein it in, but keep assessing it with the grand plan elsewhere. I love to hear the music that I'm creating. I'm still, an oral musician, so I often do mock-ups. If it's choral work, so I'll sing through all the parts and, get a sense of what is the experience of singing it. I think that's really important to me to connect and understand what the performers are going through. But between these three sort of different ways of operating, I'll move in and out. And if one side is not working so well that day, then at least I can approach another side of it.
Now, what really interests me is what you're going to write for Hertfordshire Chorus. Your subject is Sarojini Naidu, who's a very famous Indian woman who lived from the end of the 19th century through to the middle of the 20th century. Could you tell us a little bit about her and why she is your inspiration for this particular work?
Absolutely. So Sarojini Naidu was an Indian freedom fighter, as you said, and sort of famously fought alongside Mahatma Gandhi ji and several other important individuals, and also did a lot of work for women in particular in this movement of India. So she has always been somebody who we look up to, a hero. She broke a lot of conventions in her time too. She sort of married outside her social strata and, married for love. And so was very, very independent, and was also raised to be independent.
Now, moving on to the work itself, one of the things that you and I have talked about is the fusion of Indian and Western classical music.
Absolutely. I think we have a lot of potential to do something really fascinating here. So in terms of the way Indian musicians work, like I mentioned, it's an oral tradition. And what you can do if you want them to create something is you could provide them with a raga. In Indian music, they'll describe it as a personality that gets evoked. So it's not just a collection of notes in a certain order, but also something more, something that has to be brought into the room. So if I tell them, create in this raga, they'll create something absolutely sublime, and also something that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of, which I love. I love this idea of co-creating the work and giving everyone space to express themselves. In Indian classical music, everybody is very aware of what the people around them are doing. So there will be a song, and that will be basically a melody that would be performed somewhat unison. But the accompanying instruments, particularly say the percussion, they need to be familiar with the song, but then they are creating their own accompaniments. Rarely are they doing something that's been pre-scripted out. So that's what I'm thinking a lot about right now.
Will there be any improvisation for the choir at all, or do you see the choral elements purely written in Western notation?
I see potential for improvisation for the choir. So potentially presented in a way that, using notation they might be familiar with already, but perhaps asking new things of them. And in the case of the Indian musicians, certainly respecting their autonomy, but it would be great to also push them to try something a little bit different if the choir is also stepping a little bit out of their comfort zone.
You have actually heard some of the music that Hertfordshire Chorus have performed, haven't you?
Yes.
What's your impression of the chorus?
I am amazed. I think it's phenomenal work. I think to have that kind of level of accuracy and detail with so many voices is just really, really impressive, but also speaks to not only your skill in what you are able to get out of the singers, but how much heart and energy and obviously like sheer intelligence and brilliant musicianship they each individually bring. So I am very, very excited about the opportunity to work with them, to maybe coax different ideas out of them, but to have them be a part of that process because they're very clearly extremely committed musicians.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Shruthi, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and we can't wait for the premiere in 2022. And until then, take care, and we hope to see you over here before too long. Thank you.
Thank you.